The 89-year-old woman clutched her walker as the debt collector slammed his fist on her kitchen table. "You owe $15,000, and I'm not leaving until you pay. Do you understand me?" he shouted, leaning into her face while she flinched back. She tried to explain through tears, her voice shaking, but he ripped open her mail and threw the envelopes at her feet. She bent down slowly, apologizing over and over, when he grabbed a single piece of paper from the pile. His face went pale. He tried to shove it back, but she'd already seen it. And in that moment, everything he'd said became a lie he couldn't take back. Her name was Eleanor Price, and she was 89 years old. Eleanor had lived in the same house on Sycamore Avenue for 61 years. It was a modest two-bedroom with white siding that needed painting and a front porch where the boards creaked when you walked across them. She and her husband Frank had bought it in 1963 for $11,000, a sum that had seemed impossible at the time, but that they'd managed by saving every spare dollar for 3 years. Frank had been a postal worker. Eleanor had worked part-time at the library, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed, her voice always soft and patient. They'd raised 2 daughters in that house. The girls had shared the smaller bedroom, their twin beds separated by a nightstand with a lamp they'd fought over every night. Eleanor could still remember the sound of their voices through the thin walls, arguing about whose turn it was to turn off the light, and then the silence when they finally fell asleep. Those had been good years. Hard, but good. Frank had died 9 years ago. Heart attack. He'd been working in the garden, planting tomatoes, and had simply collapsed, gone before the ambulance arrived. Eleanor had found him there in the dirt, his hands still covered in soil, a trowel lying beside him. She'd sold the garden tools after that. Couldn't bear to look at them. Her daughters had both moved away decades ago. Jennifer lived in Colorado with her husband and 2 teenage sons. She called every Sunday, dutiful and kind, but distant in the way adult children became when they built lives far from where they started. Carol, the younger daughter, lived in Florida. She called less often, maybe once a month. She'd been angry when Eleanor refused to sell the house and move into assisted living. "You can't take care of yourself anymore, Mom," Carol had said during their last conversation, her voice tight with frustration. Eleanor had said she was fine. She wasn't fine, but she couldn't leave the house. It was all she had left of Frank, of the girls when they were small, of the life they'd built together. Eleanor lived on Social Security, $937 a month, and a small portion of Frank's postal pension, another $412, $1,349 total. Her mortgage had been paid off years ago, but there were still property taxes, utilities, insurance, groceries, and medications. She had high blood pressure, arthritis in both knees and hands, and diabetes that required daily insulin injections. The medications alone cost her $318 a month, even with Medicare Part D. She was careful. She kept a ledger, the old-fashioned kind with columns for income and expenses, writing everything down in her shaky handwriting. She knew exactly how much she had, how much she could spend, how much she needed to save for property taxes that came due twice a year. She didn't go out to eat. She didn't buy new clothes. She kept the thermostat at 62 in winter and 78 in summer. She clipped coupons even though her hands cramped holding the scissors. But 3 years ago, something had happened that Eleanor still didn't fully understand. She'd received a phone call. A woman's voice, professional and urgent, saying she was calling from Medicare about Eleanor's diabetic supplies. The woman had said there was a new program, that Eleanor qualified for a free glucose monitor and testing strips, that all she needed to do was verify her information. Eleanor had been skeptical at first, but the woman had known her name, her address, her Medicare number. She'd sounded legitimate. And the promise of free supplies Eleanor was spending nearly $100 a month on, had been too tempting to refuse. Eleanor had answered the woman's questions. Date of birth, social security number, bank account information for verification purposes only. The woman had assured her nothing would be charged, that this was just to confirm her identity. Eleanor had given her the information. 2 weeks later, a package had arrived with a glucose monitor and some testing strips. Eleanor had thought it was legitimate. But then the charges started appearing on her bank statement. $97, then another $97, every month. Eleanor had called the company, the number on the packing slip, and been told she'd signed up for a monthly subscription service. She tried to explain she hadn't, that she'd been told it was free, but the person on the phone had been dismissive. You gave us your payment information, ma'am. That constitutes agreement to the terms of service. Eleanor had tried to cancel. She'd called 6 times over 2 months. Each time she'd been transferred, put on hold for 30 or 40 minutes, then disconnected. She'd tried writing letters. They'd been ignored. The charges kept coming. $97 every month, automatically withdrawn from her checking account. After 8 months, Eleanor's bank account had been overdrawn repeatedly. The bank had charged her overdraft fees, $35 each time. The fees had piled up. Eleanor had stopped using her debit card entirely, started paying for everything in cash. But the automatic withdrawals kept happening. The bank had eventually closed her account and sent her to collections for the negative balance. $463. Eleanor hadn't understood what collections meant until she started getting the phone calls. Multiple times a day. Aggressive voices demanding payment. She'd tried to explain what had happened, but they didn't care. They said she owed the money, that she needed to pay immediately, that they could garnish her Social Security if she didn't comply. Eleanor had been terrified. She'd sent them $50, all she could afford, but they'd said it wasn't enough. The calls continued. Then the letters started arriving. Official-looking documents with bold red text. Final notice. Legal action pending. Account referred to attorney. And then, 2 weeks ago, a man had shown up at her door. Before we go any further, I need to ask, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments. And listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because stories like this don't just need to be heard, they need to be shared. Sometimes the only thing standing between justice and total destruction is one person who refuses to look away. Hit that like button if you're still with me. His name was Ryan Corbett, and he was 34 years old. He worked for Zenith Recovery Services, a debt collection agency based 2 states away. Ryan had been in collections for 11 years. He was good at it, or at least that's what his numbers said. He had one of the highest recovery rates in his office. His supervisor called him a closer. Ryan called himself a realist. People owed money. His job was to get it back. Simple. Ryan didn't think much about the people on the other end of the phone. He couldn't afford to. If he stopped to consider their situations, their stories, their desperation, he'd never collect anything. So he'd learned to tune it out, to follow the script, to push until they broke. That's what worked. The Eleanor Price account had been sitting on his desk for 3 weeks. $463 plus accumulated interest and fees, now totaling $612. She'd made one payment, $50, but had stopped responding to calls and letters. Ryan's supervisor had told him to make a field visit. Sometimes you just need to show up. Remind them this is real. Ryan had driven to Eleanor's address on a Tuesday morning in late October. The neighborhood was older, quiet, the houses small and set close together. Eleanor's house looked tired. Peeling paint, overgrown bushes, a mailbox that tilted slightly to one side. Ryan had parked on the street, grabbed his folder, and walked up to the front door. He'd knocked, firm and authoritative. Eleanor had opened the door slowly, peering through the gap with the chain still latched. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, her hair white and thin, her face deeply lined. She used a walker to stand. Yes? Mrs. Price? Eleanor Price? Yes. Who are you? Ryan had held up his badge. A laminated ID card that said Zenith Recovery Services. My name is Ryan Corbett. I'm here about your outstanding debt. We need to discuss payment arrangements. Eleanor's face had gone pale. I already sent you money. $50. That doesn't cover what you owe. We need to settle this today. I don't have any more money. I'm sorry. Mrs. Price, you owe $612. I'm not leaving until we work this out. Eleanor had started to close the door. Ryan had put his hand against it, not forcefully, but enough to stop her. Mrs. Price, if you don't cooperate, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. That means court. That means a judgment. That means we can garnish your Social Security. Eleanor's hand had trembled on the doorknob. Please, I don't have the money. Then you need to find it. Can you borrow from family? I can't ask them. Ryan had sighed, his patience wearing thin. Mrs. Price, I'm trying to help you, but you need to work with me. Can I come inside so we can talk about this like adults? Eleanor had hesitated, then unlatched the chain. Ryan had followed her inside. The house smelled like old carpet and lavender air freshener. The furniture was decades old, worn but clean. Eleanor had made her way slowly to the kitchen, her walker scraping against the linoleum floor. Ryan had followed, pulling out a chair at the small table and sitting down without being invited. Eleanor had remained standing, leaning on her walker. I already told you, I don't have the money. Ryan had opened his folder, pulled out a payment agreement form. Mrs. Price, I'm authorized to set up a payment plan. You can pay $100 a month for 6 months, plus a $50 processing fee. I can't afford $100 a month. Then $50 a month for 12 months, plus the fee. I can't afford $50 either. Ryan's voice had hardened. Mrs. Price, you have to pay something. You can't just ignore this. I'm not ignoring it. I sent you $50. That's all I have. Ryan had slammed his fist on the table. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to make Eleanor flinch. You owe $15,000, and I'm not leaving until you pay. Do you understand me? Eleanor's eyes had gone wide. 15,000. You just said 600. Ryan had frozen. He'd misspoken. The file on his desk at the office had 2 accounts. Eleanor's $600 account and another elderly woman's $15,000 account. He'd mixed them up, but he didn't correct himself. Instead, he leaned forward, his face inches from Eleanor's, his voice rising. Whatever the amount is, you owe it, and you're going to pay it. Eleanor had started crying. I don't understand. I didn't even want those supplies. They told me they were free. That's what everyone says. You signed up. You used your card. That's a contract. I didn't sign anything. Yes, you did. When you gave them your payment information. Eleanor's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold onto her walker. Please, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. Ryan had noticed a small stack of mail on the counter. Bills mostly, some unopened. He'd stood up, walked over, and grabbed the stack. What's this? You have money for other bills, but not for this? Those are property taxes. And my insurance. I have to... Ryan had ripped open one of the envelopes. A property tax bill. $374 due in 2 weeks. He'd tossed it onto the table. Then another envelope. A utility bill. He'd thrown the envelopes at Eleanor's feet. You're going to pay those, but not me? Eleanor had bent down slowly, her knees shaking, trying to pick up the scattered papers. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ryan had grabbed another piece of paper from the pile, a letter, folded in thirds. He'd started to open it when something on the outside caught his eye. The return address. Zenith Recovery Services. His company. But it wasn't his name on the letter. It was another collector's name. Mark Hansen. And the amount listed wasn't $600. It was $53. The original bank overdraft fee amount, before all the interest and fees had been added by his company. Ryan's face had gone pale. He'd looked at the letter again, read it more carefully. The date was from 4 months ago, before Eleanor's account had been assigned to him. The letter clearly stated the amount owed, $53. It also stated that if the amount was paid in full, the account would be closed and no further action would be taken. Eleanor had paid $50. The account should have been closed. Ryan had tried to shove the letter back into the pile, but Eleanor had already seen him look at it. She'd straightened up as much as she could, her voice small. What is that? Nothing? Just junk mail? No, it's not. That's from your company. I recognize the name. Ryan had stuffed the letter into his folder. It's outdated. The amount has changed. But I paid. I paid $50. You said that would close the account. I didn't say that. Someone else did. But the account wasn't closed. You still owe. Eleanor's voice had been quiet but firm. I want to see that letter. No. It's my letter. From my mail. Give it back. Ryan's jaw had tightened. He'd stood up, clutching his folder. Mrs. Price, you owe $600. If you don't pay, we're filing a lawsuit. You'll lose, and it'll cost you even more. He'd walked toward the door. Eleanor had followed as quickly as she could, her walker scraping against the floor. Please, I need that letter. It's mine. Ryan had opened the front door and walked out. Eleanor had stood in the doorway, crying, watching him get into his car and drive away. She'd stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to remember exactly what the letter had said. That night, Eleanor had called Jennifer. She'd explained everything through tears, the phone call 3 years ago, the charges, the collections calls, the man who'd come to her house. Jennifer had listened, her anger building with every sentence. When Eleanor finished, Jennifer's voice was tight. Mom, that's illegal. Everything he did is illegal. You need a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. Then I'll find you one. Don't answer the door for anyone. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. I'm going to fix this. Jennifer had called 4 lawyers the next day. 3 had said they didn't handle collections cases. The 4th, a woman named Lisa Moreno, had listened to Jennifer's summary and said, I'll take it. No fee. I've been waiting for a case like this. Lisa Moreno was 47 years old and had been practicing consumer protection law for 19 years. She'd built her career on going after predatory companies, payday lenders, debt collectors, fraudulent telemarketers. She didn't do it for the money. She did it because she'd watched her own grandmother get scammed out of her savings when Lisa was in law school, and no one had helped. She'd promised herself she'd be the person who helped. Lisa drove to Eleanor's house 3 days later. She sat at the same kitchen table where Ryan had sat, but her presence was completely different. Calm, professional, kind. She'd asked Eleanor to tell her everything, and Eleanor had, her voice shaking but steady. When Eleanor mentioned the letter Ryan had taken, Lisa's eyes had sharpened. "He took your mail?" "He tried to put it back, but I saw it. It said I owed $53, and I paid $50. Do you have a copy?" "No, but it was from his company. I remember the name on the return address." Lisa had made notes on her legal pad. "Mrs. Price, I'm going to file a lawsuit against Zenith Recovery Services and Ryan Corbett personally. What they did to you violates the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act in about 7 different ways. And if he took that letter, that's theft. We're going to get your money back, and we're going to make sure they never do this to anyone else." Eleanor's voice had been small. "Will it cost me anything?" "Not a penny. If we win, they pay. And we're going to win." Lisa had filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later. The complaint was detailed and damning. It alleged that Zenith Recovery Services had engaged in the following illegal practices: harassment and abuse, threatening legal action they had no intention of taking, using aggressive and intimidating language, false representations, claiming Eleanor owed $15,000 when the actual amount was $53, unfair practices, adding excessive fees and interest not authorized by the original agreement, unauthorized contact, showing up at Eleanor's home without proper notice, theft of correspondence, taking Eleanor's mail without permission. The complaint also alleged that Ryan Corbett had personally engaged in elder abuse, intimidation, and had attempted to conceal evidence of the company's wrongdoing by taking the letter that proved Eleanor had paid the debt in full. Zenith Recovery Services' legal team had tried to dismiss the case, arguing that Ryan had made an honest mistake, that the fees were legitimate, that Eleanor had voluntarily given her payment information to the medical supply company. But Lisa had done her homework. She'd subpoenaed Zenith's internal records. What she found was a pattern. Zenith Recovery Services had a policy of adding fees and interest to debts far beyond what was legally allowed. They routinely inflated balances to pressure people into paying more than they owed. They specifically targeted elderly customers, assuming they'd be too confused or intimidated to fight back. And they had a practice of losing payment records, claiming debts were still outstanding even after they'd been paid. Lisa had also found something else. The medical supply company Eleanor had been scammed by was owned by the same parent corporation as Zenith Recovery Services. They were running a scheme, cold calling elderly people, tricking them into providing payment information, charging them for unwanted subscriptions, then sending them to their own collections agency when they couldn't pay. It was coordinated fraud. Think about that for a second. A company scamming elderly people, then collecting the fake debt they created. If that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what will. Drop a comment if you think companies like this deserve to be shut down permanently. And if you know someone who's been harassed by debt collectors, share this video with them. Because what happens next might just give them the courage to fight back. Lisa had expanded the lawsuit to include the parent corporation. She'd also contacted the Federal Trade Commission and the State Attorney General's office. Both had opened investigations. The case had gone to trial 8 months after the initial filing. The courtroom had been smaller than Eleanor expected. She'd sat at the plaintiff's table next to Lisa, her hands folded in her lap, her walker leaning against the chair beside her. Ryan Corbett had been there, sitting at the defense table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He hadn't looked at Eleanor once. Lisa had presented her case methodically. She'd called Eleanor to testify first. Eleanor had told her story in her quiet, shaking voice, describing the phone call, the charges, the collections calls, and Ryan's visit to her home. When she described how he'd slammed his fist on the table and shouted at her, several jurors had visibly reacted. When she described how he'd taken the letter and tried to hide it, one juror had shaken her head in disgust. The defense had tried to cross-examine Eleanor, suggesting she was confused, that she'd misunderstood what Ryan had said, that she'd voluntarily signed up for the medical supply service. Eleanor had been firm. "I'm 89 years old. I'm not confused. I know what happened to me." Lisa had called Ryan Corbett to the stand. He'd walked up confidently, but that confidence had faded quickly under Lisa's questioning. "Mr. Corbett, you visited Mrs. Price's home on October 23rd. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you told her she owed $15,000. Is that correct?" Ryan had hesitated. "I misspoke. I was thinking of another case." "You misspoke. So you admit you gave her false information about her debt." "It was an accident. An accident that you used to intimidate her." "I wasn't trying to intimidate her." "You slammed your fist on her kitchen table. Multiple witnesses heard the noise from outside. Was that an accident too?" Ryan's face had flushed. "I was frustrated." "So you took your frustration out on an 89-year-old woman." The defense attorney had objected. The judge had sustained it. Lisa had moved on. "Mr. Corbett, you took a letter from Mrs. Price's mail. A letter from your own company. Why?" "I didn't take it. I just looked at it." Lisa had held up a copy of the letter. She'd subpoenaed it from Zenith's records. This letter, dated June 15th, states that Mrs. Price owed $53. It states that if that amount was paid in full, the account would be closed. Mrs. Price paid $50 on June 20th. The account should have been closed. Why wasn't it? Ryan had looked at his lawyers. One of them had whispered something. Ryan had turned back to Lisa. "I don't know. I wasn't handling the account at that time." "But you saw this letter in her home. You saw that she'd paid, and you still demanded $600. Why?" "Because that's what the system said she owed." The system. The same system that had added $500 in fees and interest to a $53 debt over 4 months. Did you ever question whether that was accurate? That's not my job. What is your job, Mr. Corbett? To collect debts. By any means necessary? By legal means. Lisa had walked back to her table, picked up another document. This is Zenith Recovery Services Employee Manual, page 47. Field collectors are encouraged to use assertive tactics to secure payment, including raised voices, displays of authority, and psychological pressure. Does that sound legal to you? Ryan hadn't answered. The judge had instructed him to answer. Ryan's voice had been barely audible. I was following company policy. Company policy that violates federal law. The defense had tried to rehabilitate Ryan on redirect, but the damage was done. Lisa had also called 2 other elderly victims of Zenith's practices, a 78-year-old man who'd been sued for a debt he'd already paid, and an 83-year-old woman who'd had her Social Security garnished for a debt she'd never incurred. Their testimony had painted a clear picture. Zenith Recovery Services was systematically targeting and exploiting elderly people. The jury had deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. They'd found in favor of Eleanor on all counts. They'd awarded her compensatory damages of $12,000, covering emotional distress, the money she'd paid, and the fees she'd incurred. They'd awarded punitive damages of $200,000 against Zenith Recovery Services and $50,000 personally against Ryan Corbett. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Holbrook, had additional words. She'd looked directly at Ryan Corbett and the Zenith lawyers. "I've been on this bench for 17 years. I've seen a lot of unethical behavior. But what this company did, systematically targeting vulnerable elderly people, inflating debts, using intimidation and threats, and then attempting to cover it up, is among the worst I've encountered." She'd turned to Ryan. "Mr. Corbett, you stood in an elderly woman's kitchen and terrorized her. You lied to her. You stole from her. And when you realized you'd been caught, you tried to hide the evidence. You showed no remorse, no empathy, no basic human decency. The jury has held you accountable, and so do I." Judge Holbrook had then addressed the Zenith lawyers. "Your company's practices are reprehensible. I'm referring this case to the State Attorney General and the FTC for criminal investigation. I'm also issuing an injunction barring Zenith Recovery Services from operating in this state, pending a full audit of your practices." The courtroom had been silent. Eleanor had sat there, tears streaming down her face, Jennifer's arm around her shoulders. Ryan Corbett had stared at the table, his face pale. The Zenith lawyers had started gathering their papers, already planning their appeal. But the appeal never happened. The FTC's investigation had moved quickly. Within 6 months, Zenith Recovery Services had been shut down entirely, its licenses revoked, its parent corporation fined $8 million. 17 executives and employees, including Ryan Corbett, had faced criminal charges ranging from fraud to elder abuse. Ryan had taken a plea deal, 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, and a permanent ban from working in debt collection. The medical supply scam company had also been shut down. The FTC had traced the operation to a call center in another state, arrested the owners, and seized their assets. Thousands of elderly victims had been identified and refunded. Eleanor had received her $12,000. She'd also received her portion of the class action settlement that had followed, another $8,000. She'd used some of it to make repairs to her house. She'd used some to pay off her property taxes for the next 3 years. And she'd put the rest in savings, a cushion she'd never had before. But more than the money, Eleanor had received something else: validation. For 3 years, she'd been made to feel stupid, confused, like she'd done something wrong. The trial had proven she hadn't. She'd been the victim, and she'd been brave enough to stand up. Jennifer had moved Eleanor to Colorado 6 months after the trial, not because she had to, but because Eleanor had decided she was ready. Ready to leave the house full of memories, ready to be closer to family, ready to stop being alone. She'd lived with Jennifer and her family for 2 years before moving into a senior community nearby. A bright, clean apartment with a garden view and weekly activities. She'd made friends. She'd joined a book club. She'd learned to play bridge. Eleanor Price died peacefully in her sleep at 93 years old, surrounded by family, her mind clear, her dignity intact. At her funeral, Lisa Moreno had spoken briefly. She'd talked about the first time she'd met Eleanor, how small and frightened she'd seemed, and how strong she'd turned out to be. Eleanor didn't just win a lawsuit, Lisa had said. She changed the law. Because of her courage, new protections were put in place for elderly consumers. Because of her willingness to stand up, thousands of other people were spared the same abuse. She didn't think of herself as a hero, but she was. And in a courthouse in another state, in a file marked "Precedent," was the transcript of Judge Holbrook's ruling. Law students studied it. Consumer protection attorneys cited it. Judges referenced it when sentencing predators who targeted the vulnerable. The words were simple but powerful. When those with power exploit those without it. When corporations prey on the elderly and infirm. when individuals use intimidation and fear to line their pockets. The law must respond with clarity and force. This court will not tolerate the abuse of our most vulnerable citizens, and neither should any of us. Those words echoed in courtrooms, in legislative hearings, in training sessions for debt collectors and customer service representatives. They echoed in the hearts of people who'd been victimized, who'd been told to be quiet, who'd been made to feel like they didn't matter. Because Eleanor had proven something essential, that standing up was possible, that justice was real, that one person's courage could create a ripple that changed everything. Even when that person was 89 years old, standing in her kitchen with a walker, facing down someone who thought she was too old, too weak, too invisible to fight back. She'd proven him wrong. And the world had listened. So here's my question. Have you or someone you love ever been harassed by a debt collector who thought they could get away with it? Drop your story in the comments. You'd be shocked how many people need to hear they're not alone in this. And if this story reminded you why we fight for the people who can't always fight for themselves, share this video. Hit that subscribe button, because we're not done exposing the people who think vulnerability is an invitation to abuse. Eleanor's story ended with justice. Let's make sure others do too.